Chaldean Grammar, Chapter 2. We're going to talk about how to make nouns singular and plural, and we're going to talk about the numbers. Pretty straightforward chapter, but there's some slight complications. So we already know how to distinguish between masculine and feminine nouns. Generally speaking, a feminine noun is going to have a tau before the final alap, and we talked about the exceptions to that. You can go back to the last chapter if you don't remember that. But nouns are also singular and plural in Chaldean. And singular nouns, let's take some examples first before we kind of draw a general rule. A singular noun is going to be something like, again, starting from the right, alma, world, sawa, old man, matha, village, chatha, sister. Those are examples of singular nouns. Plural nouns look like this. Here's an example. Alme, sawe, mathwatha, chathwatha. So let's just compare before we get to the grammar itself. Just compare. Look at these examples. So the word for world is alma. The word for worlds is alme. Alma, alme. Think about what's different there. It's just that final vowel. The a becomes an I. If you don't remember, I'll remind you, this symbol right here, the two heavy dots on top of the word, are called siame. Siame are grammatical marks that mean that this word is plural. They are not pronounced. You do not pronounce these two heavy dots on top. They just mean that this word is a plural word. The way you pronounce it is just follow the vowels. Al-me. So alma, alme. The final vowel changes from an a to an I in this case. Sawa, sawe. Sawa, sawe. Again, the vowel before the final alap changes from an a to an I. What about this? Matha, something different happens. The plural of villages is not mathe, it's mathwatha. So now we have this new ending here, watha. Matha, mathwatha. Chatha, similarly, chathwatha. So there's different ways to make a noun plural. So let's take a look at it more closely. Here's a note about the siame, which I already explained. So let's talk about the masculine plural. So there's ways to make a masculine noun plural. Let's start with that. The masculine plural is generally made in one of these ways. You change the vowel at the end from a skapa to a zlama. That's exactly what we just saw. Malka becomes malke. Warda becomes warde. One quick note, notice the siame in this case is on top of the resh. Always, whenever you have a noun that's becoming plural and you need to put the siame marks, if there's a resh in the word, you just add a dot to the resh. That's a universal rule. You always want to do that. Otherwise, you'll want to put it generally on the shortest of the letters. That's just a rule about the siame. Okay. Warda, warde. Kahna, priest. Kahne, priests. So that's the simplest rule. That's also the most common. Some words, though, and again, don't try to memorize rules about which words do this or which ones do that. You just sort of have to learn the word and just hear somebody say watha. Okay, then that's how you make the plural of that word. I do not recommend memorizing rules for this. I just think you just learn the vocab word. That's going to be a less stressful way to go about it. So let's take a look at achona, brother. You can say achone. It's not invalid to say it, but there's another way to make a plural of achona. Achon watha. So now we see this, we saw this earlier, this form of the plural, achona, achon watha. So the ending there is you add a watha to the end of the word. That's how you make the plural. Libba, I don't know why I keep doing that. Libba, libbawatha. You can say libbe, but you can also say libbawatha. There's just two alternate ways to make the plural. Baba, babawatha, fathers. So this watha ending, you can take a masculine noun and make it plural with this watha ending. So the two ways so far are kahne, kahna, kahne, baba, babawatha. You can't do everything with every word. I've never really heard anybody say kahanawatha. On the other hand, if you did say that, people would kind of raise an eyebrow like, oh, that's a little weird, but they would know what you mean. Waridawatha. Nobody really ever says that. If you do, again, they're going to think you're weird, but they're going to understand what you're saying. Here, though, libba, libbe, you could hear people say libba, but most people would expect you to say libbawatha. Why some words and not others? Again, I have no idea. Don't worry about it. Just learn the vocab word. And you just sort of learn as you go. Another form, there's another derivative form comes from adding a noun with a zlama to the end of the word. This results in a generalized meaning. Let's take a look at this. Khawra is companion. Khawre, or khure, sometimes you'll hear this pronounced khure, is companions. You would also say, though, khawrane or khurane. So these are two different ways to make a plural. Generally, if you're going to use the word with the version with the noon at the end, it's going to kind of have a more generalized meaning. So khawra, khawre, khawrane. Or you could also pronounce this khara, khure, khurane. It's sort of a different alternate pronunciation here. Tora, mountain. Tore, mountains. Torane, kind of a mountain range, like all those mountains over there. Kind of a generalized, kind of collective plural. Tora, tore, torane. So when you see this noon, you could recognize, okay, it's a plural, torane, and it kind of maybe suggests a more generalized meaning. Recognition is much more important than memorizing which words can do this and which one can. Start with a kind of passive understanding of the language so that you can understand when people are speaking and when you're reading, and you can kind of build from there to being able to speak yourself. Richa, riche, so richa is smell. Riche, smells. Richane, sort of sense in general. Richane. Well, that's another way to make the plural. A similar one, generalized meaning, comes from repeating the last root letter and adding azlama. So here's another way to make some words plural. Kimma, mouth. If you want to say more than one mouth, kimme. Kimmame means sort of openings in general. Okay. Kimma, kimme, kimmame. What are you doing? You're doubling the final letter of the root. You're kind of adding a second meme, and then you're putting that zlama under it. Gilla, grass. Gille, grasses. Gillale. Again, you're doubling that last letter, and you're adding that vowel to it. Gillale. Nuqba, hole. Nuqbe, holes. Nuqbabe, general sort of perforations. Doubling that last letter and adding that vowel. So this is more for recognition. When you see this form, just realize, or hear this form, realize it means a plural. So those are the ways to make a masculine plural, pretty straightforward. A turns into I, one way, or watha at the end, or ane at the end, or this doubling of the last letter. Kemmame, gellale, nuqbabe. Okay. The feminine plural is generally made in the same way as the masculine, but can also be in one of these ways. So what does this mean? You can take matha, village, this is a feminine noun, and you can say mathwatha. We already know that watha means plural. This is a very common way to make a feminine plural. Matha, mathwatha. Chatha, chathwatha. The watha end, you already saw that. Instead of the wow, though, sometimes the word allows you to just add a vowel to the second to last root letter. So the word for week is shabtha. This also means Saturday. Okay. If you want to say weeks, though, you don't have to say shabwatha. You can just put that vowel on the beth. So shabtha, shabatha. Shabtha, shabatha. Eta, sorry, I can't select it. Eta, some people will say etawatha, which is totally valid. You could also say eta, etatha. Eta, edtatha, or edatha. You'll hear that as well, okay? Eta, edatha. Chtitha, chtiyatha. So what's the difference? You don't need to add the waw. You can just put this vowel, the skapa, on the previous letter. Etatha, chtiyatha. That's the second way. You could also add a yod and a skapa to the final letter before the tail. So sometimes you'll see chmarta, a donkey, a female donkey, chmariatha, female donkeys. You may have heard your parents call you this sometimes. Chmarta, chmariatha. Okay. So now what's happening, instead of adding a wow or putting a vowel on that second to last letter, you're adding a yod. All means the same thing, though. It's just a different way to make a plural. Susta, susyatha. So susta is a female horse. Susyatha are female horses. So here, it's not susatha. Again, if you said susatha, people would understand what you mean. But generally, the way you say horses is susyatha. You have to insert that yod. Gargamta is thunder. If there's many thunders, gargamyatha. So the yod is inserted there with that vowel. Gargamta, gargamyatha. Finally, these feminine nouns without a final tau, these sort of exceptional ones, you generally add a tau. So if you want to say yimma, yimma is obviously a feminine noun, means mother. How do you want to say mothers? Yimmatha. So that there's no tau in yimma, but if you want to make it plural, you add the tau, and then you add an a to the tau at the end of it. Yimma, yimmatha. Urcha, urchatha. Again, urcha is a feminine noun. It doesn't have a tau, but you add one in the plural. Urchatha. Ara'a, land. If you have a bunch of lands, ara'atha. Same thing, you add a tau and the a. Tau or thou. So in general, here's the pattern, a kind of very generalized pattern. So you have melka, masculine, melke, melka, melke, meliktha, melkatha. General pattern with these exceptions. Sometimes you insert a yod, sometimes you insert a waw, sometimes you add a tau, but this is the general pattern. And adjectives are going to work just like this. And here I've taken the pattern out and just kind of put it there. So you can just memorize the pattern. And you can do this with many, many words. There's going to be exceptions in any grammatical to any grammatical point, but this is the general rule. Along with plurals, it's a good time to learn numbers. Numbers in Chaldean are found both in masculine and feminine forms, according to the gender of the noun they're modifying. So if you wanted to say 3 men, you would have a different form of the word 3 than if you were to say 3 women. So these are numbers in the adjectival sense. Mathematical numbers, as in the number 1, you just take the form of the masculine singular. So finally, on the right column, you will find the alphabet numbering system. Okay, so let's go over it. So here are the numbers. And I'll go just 1 through 10 first. So the word for one, if you want to say one man, it's pronounced like this. Cha. Now, it's with a heth. You have to make it a ch. That's fine. You can put a dot there somewhere in your book if you want. Cha. And there's this deleth at the end of it that's silenced. You don't pronounce it. Again, I repeat, why should we spell it like this if that's not the way it's pronounced? Because of history, because this is connected to other words. Because you're going to hear hdayutha. Well, where's that veleth come from? You're going to hear these words, and you should be able to recognize, oh, that comes from the number 1. Cha. It doesn't take that much longer to write this, and it doesn't take any longer to learn it. Just learn it, and now you actually know the language. I've seen people write this with like a kap and a alap, and it kind of makes me sick to my stomach. I don't suggest you do that. So, cha. The number 2 is tre. The number 3 is platha. The number 4 is arba. Sometimes it's softened to arba. The number 5 is khamsha. 6 is ishta. 7 is shaw'a, or you can soften it to shaw'a. 8 is tmanya. 9 is tish'a, or tish'a. 10 is isra, or again, it can be softened to isra. So these are the masculine numbers. Cha, tre, tlatha, arba, khamsha, ishta, sho'a, tmanya, tish'a, isra. I recommend repeating that over and over and over. So if you want to say one man, cha gora. 2 men, tre gure. 3 men, tlatha gure. 4 men, arba gure. And so on. What if the noun that you're numbering is feminine? For the numbers 1 through 10, you have a different set of numbers. So if you want to say one woman, you don't say cha bachta. I take it back. There are some villages that simply don't have these. And I respect that. I think that's actually a lot easier for the language. So there are villages that just don't have these feminine numbers. Everything is cha, tre, tlatha, arba, khamsha, ishta, sho'a. I kind of prefer that, but many of the villages don't have that. Sorry, many of the villages do have these feminine numbers, so you should be able to at least recognize them. So if you want to say one woman, you would say ghda bakhta. Instead of cha, it's ghda. You want to say 2 women, you don't say tre inche, you would say titte inche. So here, pay attention to this. Look at this. It's spelled terten. So the resh is silent and the noon is silent. Well, the resh being silent, you can kind of see why you want to write this. You want to write that resh, even though you don't pronounce it, because right here, tre, you do pronounce it. So you want to see the similarity between tre and titte. You really do want to see this. The noon at the end is kind of just classical. If that's not there, it's not the end of the world. So again, the bakhta, one woman, titte inche. Inche is an irregular plural for the word woman. So 2 women. The word for 3 feminine is tallath. Tallath inche. Tallath orchatha. Tallath mathwatha. Arbe inche. So let's see. Kha becomes ghda. Tre becomes titte. Tlatha becomes tallath. Arba becomes arbe. Khamsha becomes khammish. Khammish inche. Ishta becomes ishit. Sho'a becomes ishwa. Tmanya becomes tmane. Tisha becomes tisha. Isra becomes issar. So the feminine numbers are dha, titte, tallath, arbe, khammish, ishit, ishwa, tmane, tisha, issar. After that, you only have one form for masculine and feminine. So it's a little bit easier to learn. If you want to say 11, what you do is you take the number 1 and the number 10. Kha issar becomes khadesar. Khadesar. Khad issar khadesar. 11. 12 is 2 and 10. Tresar. Tresar. 13, if you could guess it, you would guess it correctly. Tiltasar. So there's a kind of a movement of vowels here. Instead of tlatha or tullath, it's tiltasar. But you can see the number 3 right here inside it. So tiltasar. Khadesar, tresar, tiltasar. 14 is arbasar. Arbasar. 15 is 5 and 10. Khamshasar. 16 is ishtasar. Ishta, issar, ishtasar. 17 is ishwasar. 7 and 10. Sho'a, issar, ishwasar. 18 is tmanesar. 8 and 10. Now, if you paid attention, it's actually using these feminine forms mostly plus the number 10. So it's issar, tisha, tmanesar. So that's maybe a good way to memorize these or to learn these, is to say, okay, they're a little bit closer to the feminine form. Tmanesar. 19 is a little bit exceptional in the way most people pronounce it. It's very, very formally tishasar, but usually the way people say 19 is not tishasar. They'll say itchasar. Itchasar. That's a more common way to say 19. Itchasar. It's kind of like they took tishasar and just kind of like smooshed it together into one sound. Itchasar. Then the word for 20 is isri, isriin. Technically, this really means 2 tens. So issar is 10. Isriin, this is a grammatical form that it's the dual. So this is isriin, 2 tens, so 20. If you want to say 21, there's 2 ways to do it. Some villages will say it this way, cha u isri, 1 and 20. Other villages will say isri ucha. Totally valid. Both of them are perfectly acceptable, perfectly fine. Cha u isri or isri ucha. And so on with all the other 21, 22, 23, treo isri or isri tre, and so on. The word for 30 is tlathi. Tlathi. So you see the word tlatha there, and it's that ending, tlathin, tlathi. Arabi is 40. 50 is khamshi. 60 is ishti. 70 is sho'i. 80 is tmanai. 90 is tish'i. Now, again, if you want to say 33, you would say tlatha. You would say tlatha u tlathi, 3 and 30. Or tlathi u tlatha. And so on with all these numbers, they're combined in exactly the way you would guess. Okay? So that's all the way up to 90, tish'i. So let's read the numbers, the tens. So issar, isri, tlathi, arabi, khamshi, ishti, sho'i, tmane, tish'i. Number 100 is imma. Imma. 200 is tre imme, as you would guess, 200s. Tlatha imma, 300. Tre imma, tlatha imma. Arba imma, khamsha imma. You will also hear, very validly, people saying 200s. So you'll hear tre imma, but you'll also hear tre imme. And I think they're both valid ways to say it. It's 200, that's fine. But it could be 200s. Yeah, there's 2 100s. So if you hear tre imme, that's perfectly valid. You'll hear that as well. Tlatha imma, arba imma, khamsha imma, and so on. The word for 1,000 is alpa. The word for 10,000 is rabutha. This is a very rare word, but you'll hear rabutha. And if you hear rabwatha, it means tens of thousands. Okay? Now, what if you just want to write the number without writing the word for the number? Here's the numbering system over here on the right. I will warn you, this is a very inefficient numbering system. The usual 1, 2, 3, 4, like we do in English, the sort of Arabic numerals, I think are much more efficient. There's a reason why everybody around the world uses those now. But if you're looking at an old book and you want to know what the page numbers are, this is often how they'll be numbered. The letter alap means 1. That's good. So far, so good. Beth is 2. Gamal is 3. Dalath is 4. He is 5. All that's great. Wow is 6. Zain is 7. Hayth is 8. Taith is 9. Yod is 10. Great. So far, perfect. Here, okay, if you want to say 11, it's Yoth Alap. All right, that makes sense. That's fine. So 10 and 1. Yoth Beth, and so on. But then when you get to 20, it gets a little harder. So now for the number 20, you take the letter Kap. So after Yoth comes Kap. If Yoth is 10, Kap is 20. So now Kap, and you have Kap Elap for 21. Okay, it starts to get annoying here. Lamad means 30. So if you want to say 31, Lamad Elap. Mim is 40. Again, 41 is Mim Elap. Noon is 50. Simkat is 60. Aya is 70. Pe is 80. Sade is 90. Qop is 100. That's great. Resh is 200. So if you want to say 291, you say Resh Sade Elab. Okay, that's fine. Sheen is 300. Tau is 400, and then you run out of letters. So if you want to say 500, you take a tau and add a qop to it, and then you put in what other numbers you have afterwards. I really don't like this number system. I don't know anybody who does. It's the way it is, so whatever. It's good to learn in case you're looking at some old books. If you want to say 1,000, usually the way people do that now is they'll take the letter elep and just put a heavy dot on top of it, and just people have agreed that that's 1,000. If you want to say 10,000, I guess this is a way to do that. You generally will never count that high in this numbering system because it's so inefficient. So that's the numbering system. Here's some examples. If you want to say 1 week, a week is feminine, so you say Gda Shaptha. You use the feminine form of 1. 2 people, Tre Nashe. If you want to say 124 books, Amma u Arba u Isri Kthawe. 104 and 20 books. Amma u Arba u Isri Kthawe. If you want to say 7 villages, Ishwa Mathwatha. And you can spend some time, doing this yourself and mixing and matching different numbers, and that's a good way to learn it. Let me read through the vocab. Urcha is path. Achona is brother. Those hayths are both almost always ch, so if you want to put a dot there, that's probably a good idea. The word for well is bera. Well as in like a well of water. Bera. Baba is father. Gomta is a hole like in the ground. Gomta. Gargamta is thunder. Gilla is grass. Warda is flower. Khara is companion. Khatha is sister. Khlitha is sin. Again, I would put a dot next to these heths. Khmara is donkey. Tora is mountain. Yimma is mother. Kahna is priest. Kimma is mouth. Libba is heart. Malacha is angel. Melka is king. Matha is village. Nuqba is like a hole in the wall, so a horizontal hole, as opposed to Gomta, which is a vertical hole, like a hole in the ground. Sawa is old man, or it can be a grandfather. Alma is world. Eta is church. Usually the deleth is kind of absorbed into the tau. Eta. Richa is smell. Shabtha is week. So here's your homework for this chapter. Take all the nouns and make them plural, just to practice in this chapter. Make these plural nouns singular. I give you these. Translate these into English, some phrases that you're translating. Translate into Chaldean, so some active translation there. And then write 7 short phrases in Chaldean using the materials from chapters 1 and 2. All right, good luck.